So hi everyone, my name is Justyna Lucznik. I'm a program manager on the Power BI team, and I own the AI capabilities within Power BI. So in terms of what we're going to look at today, I wanted to start out with a little bit of a brief overview of some of the capabilities that we have within Power BI when it comes to our AI functionality. As I go through these, what I would love is if in the chat there were specific things you wanted me to dive in deeper, please feel free to just input them. I have the chat open on my second screen. As you know, this is I'm super happy for this to be a fully interactive session. I can switch around the demos and kind of jump between different things depending on, if there are specific things you're interested in. But what I'm going to start with is giving you an overview of all the different things that we have, and then we can kind of decide where we want to dive deeper. So with AI and Power BI, we really cater towards different types of personas, ranging from data scientists to analysts and end users. And depending on which persona we're looking at, the capabilities are slightly different, and the intents are slightly different too. So if we look at the left for data scientists, this area is really about providing extensibility with Power BI and our AI capabilities. So this is basically situations where data scientists might have built models in with, let's say, machine learning. With Azure machine learning, they might have some Python scripts, some R scripts, and they want to bring those things that they've already built into Power BI. And so we offer capabilities where you can integrate these Azure ML models, you can bring these Python scripts, bring these R scripts, and really kind of have a better together story. So we're not trying to compete. We're not saying that if you have Power BI, you no longer need Python, but it's about how do we bring these things together. As we move more towards the right, this is where we start moving more towards our citizen data scientists, our data engineers or analysts, and it's about taking capabilities like automated machine learning in Azure, taking capabilities like cognitive services in Azure, and bringing them directly into Power BI in a low-code way. So this means that if I want to build machine learning models, I don't have to actually go and write any Python code. I can use a point-and-click experience in order to be able to operationalize and build my machine learning models. Similarly, when it comes to things like sentiment analysis, key phrase extraction, these are cognitive services that we're providing, which also are just work out of the box, no need to write any code for them. Now, as we move towards the right-hand side, this is where we're taking a lot of our different capabilities, different statistical functions, machine learning models, and packaging them up in the most seamless way possible, which is through visualizations in Power BI. And this is really where we basically can provide these capabilities to end users to interact with as part of their reports. And they can serve specific business functions. So this is stuff like key driver analysis. This is things like doing root cause analysis with the decomposition tree. Another one that we don't have on this list, but that has very new addition, is the anomaly detection capabilities. And we will be going through that in more detail, as well as language capabilities, both for generating language as well as using language for querying your data. So this is our smart narratives capabilities, as well as our Q&A capabilities. So it's really all about helping our users explore their data, find insights in the most seamless possible way. Right, and I see already there's a couple of comments in the chat about going through some of the prediction capabilities, smart narratives. Yes, anomaly detection, you're absolutely right, Mike. It's not on this list, but we will go through that as well. And so, please keep these suggestions coming. I'm definitely going to cover everything that's been listed in this list for sure. So with that, I'm going to just jump straight into the demos and the various capabilities. And I'm going to start with some of the more end user focused capabilities and then move our way more into the predictive world. So let's start out by jumping into a Power BI report that I have over here. So in this scenario, I'm looking at some online sales data, and I want to start adding some, enrichments to this data through the, in this case, having natural language generated, describing what's going on in my report. Now, the first way you can start using smart narratives is by simply right-clicking a visual as you author your reports and actually just choosing to summarize this visual. So when I actually go and summarize this visual, we're going to create a smart narrative that appears next to my visuals and looks at what's going on in this visual and just creates a summary for me. And this, in terms of smart narratives, this is actually just an enriched text box. So it's really, we've just taken this text box in Power BI, we've completely revamped it, and we are repurposing it for our smart narratives capabilities. So you can see over here, we're looking at transactions by region and city. We have number of transactions, we have revenue per transaction. And the smart narrative automatically tells us where it's seeing the highest revenue, both in terms of absolute transactions as also revenue per transaction, which regions are popping up, as well as which what kind of values do most transactions fall between. So a really quick kind of summary that I can do, and I can do this with any visual. I can right-click and summarize any visual in Power BI. There might be a couple of visuals missing while this feature's in preview. So for example, you can see cards can't be summarized yet, but once we go GA in a couple of months, every visual in Power BI will be able to be summarized like this. But there's more I can do with this capability than just right-click each visual and choose to summarize it. I also have a completely new visual that is the Smart Narratives visualization. And when I actually select this visual, what this is going to do is it's going to look at everything that's on my report page. And it's going to figure out what are the most interesting things that are going on with this data. It's going to look at things like the size of the visual, the type of visual, whether it has a legend, whether it's time series, whether it's comparative. And it's going to automatically create me this narrative that basically it automatically summarizes everything that's going on this page. And this is, again, actually just the text box, but it basically, we have different entry points with different capabilities, where with the smart narrative, it looks at everything on the page. With the right click, it just goes with one visual at a time. But because this is just a text box, it's fully formatable, it's fully customizable. So in a couple of clicks, I can really make this visual stand out in my report and make it just a seamless part of my report. So you can see this is what I've gone ahead and built in a couple of minutes, with just some basic formatting. Now let's take a look at what sorts of summaries we see are getting generated. So over here, for example, we have our website visits and our sales data, and we can see that we automatically do some trend analysis for our users, and we kind of look from the beginning of the series to where we are to kind of understand the overall trend of the data. But then we also look at some of the more interesting trends that we're seeing. So rather than just looking at the whole data, we also can see that revenue actually in the last 2 months, we see that we see that it's been increasing. And it has a a 20 or a 30 over a 30% increase in these last couple of months. So you can see we automatically do run some analyses, like for example this trend analysis that we're just adding as things that our customers now don't have to work out themselves. But I can also customize this narrative. So if I want to go and let's say change the font or maybe change the colors around, I can do all my customizations, but then I can also add my own summaries to this. So if, for example, I want to look at my returns and say returns amounted to, I can just type that in. And at this point, what I can do is actually just add a dynamic value. So because I want this value to be recalculating, right? I don't want it to be just a static value. So I can do is basically say, well, what I want this to be is sum of returns. Now, sometimes people ask, why can't they use DAX here? Why do they have to use Q&A? You can absolutely use DAX. If you've already created the DAX measure, you can just reference it here, and it's just going to do the calculation. But this is just for those quick calculations. Maybe you don't want all these calculations inside, your data model, or there's, we also want to make this super simple. You can just use Q&A to define these as well. Now, when I save this, what we're going to do here is let's just make this white so it's easier to see. And now this becomes a dynamic value in my smart narrative. And what's also important is you can create these dynamic values, again, just in a text box as well. So you don't have to build the smart narrative to get these dynamic value capabilities. This is just a new capability we've added to Power BI. So now when I click around on my report, you're going to see that these smart narratives are actually going to update. And we can see here, for example, returns is now updated to 11,000. Or maybe if I just want to find insights about my electronics products, we can see now that our returns have amounted to 4,000. And not only do the dynamic values update, but sometimes even the intent of the whole summary changes. So if we look at our visits and revenue here, we can now see that revenue trended upwards while visits have actually trended down between March and April, which is not something that we saw before. Before we were seeing both upward trends across both of them. So the summaries themselves can change as well. So this is, there's a lot of, I've seen a lot of really interesting ways that people are using these smart narratives. It's very versatile in the capabilities. You can use them, for example, as report level tooltips, right? So you can kind of hover over different data points and have these smart narratives appear as a tooltip. There is, people are using these to create highly customizable, like KPI cards, so mimicking a KPI card, but with like lots of, lots of formatting and the templates changing depending on what's going on with the data. So, I've seen some really interesting use cases. I'm looking forward to seeing, what else you guys come up with in terms of how you use these capabilities. And I see there are a few comments in the chat, so I'm just going to pause here and read through them and see if there's anything that I can sort of answer over here. Okay, so Mike is asking about how many queries are made from a single smart narrative window. So great question. I know there's been a bunch of performance work being done with smart narratives, and I know that the intent is to send all of them in a single query, but I'm not sure if that work has been done yet or not. I'll have to check with my engineering team to double check that, Mike, but I will get back to you on that one. It's a really good question. Okay, so is there some property that allows you to freeze the scroll bar position when interacting in the report? So do you mean, Benny, would you mind elaborating? Do you mean the scroll bar in the smart narrative itself?
Yeah, that one, because I noticed that you scrolled down to show the number that changed the number of sales, but when you clicked in the report, it automatically jumped upwards to the top of the visual.
I see. Oh, great point. There's nothing that does that right now, but I'll take that as a feedback for the team just to see if that's something that we could easily kind of tweak. That might be a really easy change to do.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then I see there's also a question about creating your own functions into the DAX engine. So that's a really interesting one. So the idea here, and Mike, feel free to kind of elaborate, is I presume you basically want to create some sort of run some sort of analysis. It looks like you're talking about, let's say, doing something like basket analysis for a retail location. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you would like? Would you like to be able to write like R or Python, like whole Python scripts, for example, in a DAX-like manner, or what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me. Is it going through? Okay. So there was a question that kind of came out, and I think this makes a lot of sense. The fact that you're exposing some ability to make, well, the AI feature is already kind of in DAX and it's kind of hidden behind the scenes, but it seems like there's the ability to make a custom function. I'm thinking almost kind of like a macro, like how I would write it in Excel. There's a custom script that I need to run. I'm not really leaning whether or not it's Python or R or something along those lines. I would think it's one of those two, likely Python because it's more popular at the time, but I mean, I use a lot of statistical things out of R as well. And so I may need, again, to make the things more efficient, I may want to run a custom script that would do some sort of analysis for me. Like particularly for like in a basket analysis, right? I want to know this person put these things in this basket and has made this purchase this n number of times. What are the most common things that are bought together? But that may be very specific for my client or my use case. It may not make sense to put it in the Microsoft product at this point, but I'd like the ability to be able to build my own AI function and then inject that into the framework of DAX. That way I could call it out and say, hey, I'm going to use this particular DAX function, shove it some data, and it would spit back out to me like a kind of a real-time answer. And I think it would also save me some time, particularly when I'm trying to iteratively go through or click different groupings or categories. One of the really slow things I don't like about machine learning is if I want to feature things, I have to calculate everything at once. I may not want that. I just may want to say, for the Northwest region, calculate my basket analysis. And as I click on things, I want it to update an analysis based on what I'm filtering down to. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And one other question is, would you like, or do you have a preference whether this would be like, okay, I've defined like a Python script or R, some language, and I can basically run that, copy that script and have it, wrap it in like this function call, or would you like the ability to be able to have, let's say, hey, I've got a model defined in Azure ML and I want to call into it. So it's not that I have all the logic. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So let me tell you like 2 ways I'm accessing the model, right? So there's one way I'm accessing my data models is where I have a thin report, I'm going to call it. There's a data model that's in powerbi.com. And then I'm accessing that data model with a report that's just a veneer, right? It's the live connected model back to the regular analysis services model. Mm-hmm. The second way I'm connecting to that model is I have an application that is directly running queries against the same data model. So the model to me is my single endpoint, and it needs to be responsive and very quick. So I'm doing aggregations and things for my application by directly talking to that data model. Where I'm thinking this potentially would be valuable is if I'm doing some sort of analysis or sort of custom AI featuring, I would want to be able to access it directly through the thin report, meaning build visuals or build context around that data that's outputted. But I also want the ability to go use it from my application to directly query the model itself. So I think the performance, what I would like to see is directly from the model. How you want to engineer the backend, whether that model is directly querying an AI enabled feature that's in Azure somewhere, I think that's fine as long as the latency is fast enough. But I have to feel like the filtering and aggregation of data will be more efficient in the AS model, which then I can make my machine learning or my AI feature very lightweight to only address whatever rows or aggregated values I have inside my model. I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel like it would be better served in the model area than having a separate call out back to an AI ML feature, because I'm already paying for the AS model to be there. I don't really want to pay for more AI in a different area in Azure.
Totally get it that you don't. So you're basically, I guess then you'd be fine having all the logic defined in that kind of function that you would be writing. It's not necessary. Okay,
correct.
Got it.
Yeah. I'd like to centralize it in the model because that's being used by many different reports, and now an application is directly hitting that model. So I'm putting the business logic of what that would be in the model. I don't technically need it to be somewhere else that I'll bring through. If I'm going to use Azure ML, I'm probably going to pre-calc everything and then bring it in as tables after the fact.
Yeah, got it. Okay, that's helpful. We don't transparently, we don't have that on our semester plan at the moment, but it is something I'm hearing more and more from customers about this need for this sort of you're right. We can provide things like anomaly detection, key influencers, but we're kind of catering with those features towards users who would never do that themselves, would never build anything like that themselves in the first place. And it's sort of trying to go after the generic use cases. But what you're talking about is there's this long tail of functions that customers need for their own specific business problems. It could be market basket analysis. It could be lots of different things. That what if analysis, there could be a ton of them. That we're not going to go and build each one, and we're not, even if we went and build it, we wouldn't get it exactly right for those customized needs.
Exactly. So, yes.
Democratize those capabilities and let people go and do those themselves. It it makes a ton of sense. I think it's something we need to have more conversations about within, again, transparently within our team, because we have been catering very much towards the business user scenarios, but I do think this is one that we do need to think about more because I am hearing more and more about this. So thank you for bringing it up, Mike.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to keep going, but please do keep the questions, comments, feedback coming in. This is really, really helpful for me selfishly as well.
Justyna, there's one more question that I'd like you to answer now as well. So it's, if you scroll up a bit more, it's Jenny that asked, they often use tabular cubes and live connections as data sources. Are there any plans to make features like this available for those types of data sources?
Got it. Thank you. And sorry, I totally missed this question. So thank you for highlighting it. Yeah, so, you know, it's a great question, and it is something that we've been kind of trying to figure out whether, you know, this makes our semester plan or not. Right now, we are not doing the work to invest in live connections to Azure analysis services or our on-prem AS, because the current plan is really to you know, support. We do support live connection, but it's only to Power BI Premium, and so you know, as we kind of look forward, we will keep sort of figuring out whether, you know, we do want to go ahead and do the work to also support Azure AS. But the reason why that's a little bit tricky for us is we basically deploy DAX extensions, and it's a lot easier for us to do this when it's part of, you know, the engine that ships with Power BI. So with Premium, you know, that's all hosted in the Power BI clusters, whereas with Azure AS, that's additional work that we have to do to deploy these DAX functions and maintain them outside of Power BI Premium. So at the moment, we don't have that work planned out. But I know it's a common request, and it is something that we are trying to balance out. So I hear you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the other capability that we have shipped very recently in the last 2-3 months is the ability to add anomaly detection to visualizations in Power BI as well. So in this case, I've got my revenue data, and what the requirements for anomaly detection at the moment, while it's in preview, is it is restricted to line charts with a single line, and that is time series data. And so what I can do in this case is, this capability is currently very recently, very soon, you're going to see this over here under your data drill of being able to just find anomalies. We haven't, this isn't shipped yet, so this will be available soon. But right now, what you can do is go into your analytics pane over here, and you can see this capability of find anomalies. And this basically is just a shortcut to this capability over here. But if I jump into my find anomalies, you see there's a lot of different functionality and different formatting options I can apply. To talk briefly about the algorithm and what we're actually integrating with, what we've been working with with some of the Microsoft research teams and the Azure teams to integrate the, you might be familiar with the Cognitive Service Outlier API. That is some MSR Microsoft research technology that is available in Azure, and we've basically worked with them to get this to ship just as part of Power BI, directly built in. And so this is basically running that same capability that you would get if you were running the Outlier Cognitive Service in Azure. And what I can do is, for example, you know, we do offer some parameters, such as tweaking things like the sensitivity. So if I want it to be, you know, a lot more sensitive to anomalies, less sensitive, I can go and kind of play around with that. Sometimes customers ask me, how do I choose the sensitivity? My response would be, think about the business problem you're trying to solve, and what makes more sense. do you never want to miss an anomaly? Because anomalies, for example, are very costly for you, or they're, you know, high business impact. So you'd rather maybe get a couple of things that are like false positives. They're not real anomalies, but you never want to miss an anomaly. In that case, I would say make it make it more sensitive. Maybe not that sensitive, but like a little bit, you know, more sensitive, so that, you know, basically the algorithm is really, you know, is going to flag more points. Like, for example, this one might not be an anomaly, but I'd rather just have it flagged because I don't want to miss anything. If you don't want, you know, that many anomalies, you only want to be notified or see it in the chart when, like, you're definitely sure something's an anomaly, then I would say, you know, make it a lot less sensitive, and then you can see these confidence intervals are much wider. And so it needs to really be standing out for something to be an anomaly. So, you know, basically that's sort of some of the guidance over here. We do try and keep a default as well. Now I can do things like change the shape around of these anomalies. I can do things like change the size, change the colors around, and, you know, maybe change the range colors. So you can see, you know, there's a lot of customization that I can do over here. Now, the other side of this anomaly detection is I can actually click into this anomaly. And by clicking into it, what we're going to do is we're going to run another component of the Microsoft Research code, which is called, if I remember correctly, RCA, what this basically does is it decomposes the time series into the individual components, and then tries and figures out what things could be possible explanations for this anomaly. So what we see over here, for example, is that, you know, age group seems to be a factor that might be, you know, related to this anomaly. And I can click into this and see kind of more details about this. Now, what the strength score tells me is how correlated, you know, do we see this age group of 50 to 65 being with the aggregate time series data. So what we do is we figure out the expected value for revenue for age group 50 to 65, and then we look at the, you know, the point of the anomaly, and then we do that, we take that as a ratio to the expected value. In this case, we can see the expected value for the aggregate time series is, you know, is kind of between these 2,500, 3,300. So we have an expected value that we actually compute, and it actually had the value of 5,000. So it's kind of a ratio between these two numbers, and that's what kind of gives you the strength. And there's more details about this in our documentation as well. But what I can also do with these anomalies and with these explanations is actually tweak these for my needs. So you'll see there's this explain by field well in the analytics pane. And so what I can do is, for example, say, well, you know what, I only want to look at maybe a couple of different, you know, fields when, oh, not here, sorry, a couple of different fields when it comes to actually explaining these anomalies. So, and for some reason, I cannot drag these in. Let me try leaving that. I might have messed up this somehow. All right, let's try this again. Let's maybe try product. Okay, for some reason, I cannot add the explain by field. I will file, I just got the latest build, so I will file a bug with my team. But basically what this would allow me to do, if I could drag it in, is to restrict, and actually let me try one more thing. Let me try removing this anomaly and adding it again. And if this doesn't, oh no, now I've completely broken it. Okay, so basically what that would allow me to do, if it did work, okay, let's one last try. Okay, there we go. I will still file a bug with my team, but what I can basically do is say, okay, I only want to restrict these anomalies to look across maybe a couple of different fields. such as product, customer segment, and city. And now when I actually, let's do that experience again, and when I click on this anomaly, you'll see now we're only searching across those fields for explanations. And so what you can basically see is like now we have product as board games, customer segment as adventure as the things that are explaining this anomaly. So, often, you might know more or less where your anomalies are coming from. So you might want to just restrict that search space to only focus on, those fields that you care about rather than looking across the whole data model. So this is the new anomaly detection capabilities. I wanted to pause here and see if there are any questions or any thoughts about this.
Yeah, Mike put in one specific question about the anomaly detection.
Mm-hmm.
Does the possible explanation window, does it also appear when the report is published with anomaly detection into the Power BI service?
Yes. So if once you have this published in the Power BI service, and if you were to click on your anomalies, this would pop up as well for your end users. They wouldn't be able to configure it, so they wouldn't be able to change like which fields it runs on top of, or a lot of these other things, but they would be able to click onto anomaly and see the possible explanations.
Okay, and then one specific point of feedback from Christopher on smart narratives. He's trying it out himself as we speak. Does the smart narratives visual also work with visualizations like tables and matrices?
It will in a couple of months.
Okay.
So currently,
yeah.
Currently we are restricting it to a couple of the visuals, but when we go GA, it's going to work on every core visual that makes sense. So it might not work for like, let's say the Power Apps visual or like a slicer, but it will work on every like visual, whether it's a card, a table, a map. So all of those visuals will be supported for GA.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all the questions for now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you have any feedback, again, as I kind of go through the presentation, if you have any feedback on anomaly detection, we are working on our GA plan right now. So this is a great moment to give us feature requests or things you might want to see. So feel free to type those into the window as well. I'll definitely be reading through all of them and listening carefully to the feedback we're getting. Okay, so this is these are basically some of the new visual capabilities that we have. There's a bunch of other AI visual capabilities that we have, around things like Q&A, so being able to ask questions about the data and getting back, visualizations that are interactive. So if I, click on something in here, I can click on something in, another visual and things update. I'm not going to go through these in a ton of detail because I know that people wanted to hear about the predictive capabilities, so I'm going to jump into those. But I did want to just highlight that there are a couple of other things which, I'm happy to go through in more detail if any of these spark your interest, and we have some time left over at the end. We have, things like the decomposition tree, which allows you to do root cause analysis by drilling into your data in, any order that you want. So you can start with one of these and just sort of ask for high or low values to kind of do that sort of root cause analysis. And again, this is fully interactive, so if I click around, things will update across the whole tree. And the filter works both in and out of the tree. And then we also have I'm going to just switch PBIX files. We also have things like the key influencers visual, which runs some linear logistic regressions and decision trees to help you understand, for example, in this case, what influences a product to be on backorder. This is a nice segue into the other scenario we're looking at for the predictive analytics, which is our supply chain scenario. Products that are on backorder are basically products that are out of stock. We want to minimize those because we don't want products to not be available for our customers to buy. So this sort of visual lets you explain like historical data and see, hey, historically we saw that products that are on backorder typically are the ones that have a volatile demand, or maybe are those products where we're behind in manufacturing. And this is basically the output of this regression model, whilst top segments gives me my decision tree splits. So in this case, top segments basically gives me multiple factors that says, hey, it looks like the products that are most likely to be out of stock or on back order are those that have volatile demand and where manufacturing is behind. In these cases, we find that 26% of products are actually are on back order. And typically we have about 11% on back order. So this is a much more significant group. So, this is really, this runs similar models that you would get with when you built a machine learning model, but the intention of this is really explanation and looking at historical patterns rather than doing anything, spewing out any predictions. And so it really depends on what kind of problem you're trying to solve. If you're just looking for the sort of explanations of systemic value, systemic kind of things that are happening, where maybe, I'm going to try and investigate now my volatile products, then something like Key Influencers works pretty well because it's fully interactive with the report. And it's also very visual experience. However, if you're interested in actually having predictions that are going to tell you which of your products are going to end up on back order in a month, then this visual is not going to help you with that. For that, you need something like the automated machine learning capabilities, which we will go through in some detail now. And yes, I can share the Power BI files. I can, I don't know what would be the best way to distribute them, whether it's just to respond to the chat, but I can share a zip file with all the demo files that I basically have, which includes these ones and more. So
I can send out every demo file, etc., to people that registered, so people that I can actually email.
Great. Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so let's now look at the predictive analytics experience. And one of the things that in order to build the automated machine learning models in Power BI, that is an experience that exists on top of data flows. Now, for those of you who might not be familiar with data flows, just to really briefly introduce them, you can think of data flows as our enterprise data prep capabilities in Power BI. So, in Power BI, you of course have your Power Query experience, where you can go and do all of your data prep and your data transformations. And once you apply these transformations, you can build your reports and then you publish those reports online, and everything is kind of contained in this Power BI file. But with data flows, you can actually decouple your data prep away from your report and from your data model. So you basically can, and I'll just show you a quick example of, actually I can go into this one here. So this looks very familiar, as you can see, to that Power Query experience, except this is in the web. But once I actually build a data flow, that data flow can be used by multiple people to build lots of different reports on top of. So it's a much more, you can share the work you've done with more people. So, you don't have to have 5 people connecting to the same SQL server. You can have a single data flow that connects, and then people build on top of that data flow. It also uses compute in the cloud, so it's not constrained by the memory of your machine. So there's a number of different reasons why, data flows is a kind of interesting and a recommended capability for doing that enterprise data prep solution. But another thing that we have with data flows that we don't have in Power Query on the desktop is our automated machine learning capabilities. So let's take a look at what that is. So here I have my back orders data. This is my historical back orders that we were just looking at in the Power BI file. And you'll see over here, I've got this little brain icon where I can actually add a new machine learning model. So there's a couple of steps I need to go through in terms of this wizard, where what I need to do first is define what is it that I want to actually predict. So what is the outcome field that I want to use? So in my case, I have a true or false field that tells me whether a product is on back order or not on back order. But this could be lots of different things. You could be looking at credit card fraud, and you have high, medium, low risk, or something that was a fraudulent transaction or not. Or it could be a customer satisfaction survey, and whether customers gave you a high score or a low score. It could be house prices, right? It could be just different prices for something. So whatever you're interested in predicting, this is basically the field that you choose over here. Now, when I click next, the next thing I need to do is choose the type of model that I want to build. And I have a couple of different choices. I have a binary prediction model, general classification. Regression is grayed out because we realized you don't have a number, so we can't estimate a numeric value. But in my case, I actually want to use a binary prediction model, which is basically either I am on back order or I am not on back order. And so the only thing I have to do here is define what my labels are. And my labels are basically, once I build this model, what is going to be shown to users after we score it. So when something is predicted to be on back order, I want to call that high risk, because for my business users who are going to be interacting with this, I want them to immediately be able to see things that are high risk. Otherwise, I'm going to label it as low risk. And the final step is then to be able to select the columns that I want to use, or the fields that I want to use for actually explaining fields I want to use that could potentially explain the target that I am predicting. So for example, maybe my manufacturing is going to be a good indicator of whether something's on back order or not. Or maybe the inventory levels, again, are going to be a good indicator. So those are the sorts of things that I can change this around. I can choose different things or remove different things that I may want. Now, the final thing I need to do is give this model a name and really just start training it. And what we're going to do once we train it is we're going to run automated ML behind the scenes. Automated ML is something that exists in Azure already. We've just brought it into Power BI, and it does things like feature selection, it does algorithm selection, it does hyperparameter tuning, and it builds lots and lots of models to try and build you the best possible model with data that's provided. So then what you can actually do is you can see the model that's been trained over here, the backorder risk, and I can view this training report, which I've already opened over here. Now, what this training report gives me an indication of how well this model is performing. So I can see things like my area under the curve, which generally gives me indicate this can be considered like a number. If I was to encapsulate the model performance of a single number, I would be looking at this AUC score. It depends. People often ask, what is a good score? It goes back to the business problem you're trying to solve. If you're trying to predict whether someone's going to convert following a marketing campaign, you probably are okay having a lower AUC score. If you have a healthcare scenario where you're looking at highly sensitive patient data, you probably want a higher score because you really want to be sure that your model is performing well. So it really depends on the business domain. You can see the top predictors over here. So what are the factors that were actually most influential? So you can, again, see, for example, our manufacturing goods, and we can start getting some insights into what the model has learned. So you can see, unsurprisingly, that when we are behind on manufacturing, the percentage of high-risk records is much larger than when we are doing well in manufacturing. And here, we also can play around with things like recall and precision, and you can see things updating in the confusion matrix. So remember when we talked about anomalies and the sort of sensitivity, whether you want to pick up more anomalies or less anomalies, this is very, very similar. So this basically allows you to choose whether you want to have, you want to be very, very sensitive to actually calling something a high risk product. So I need to be really sure that something is high risk before I label it as high risk, and that kind of increases your precision. Or if you want to be more liberal and say, yeah, let's just label more things at high risk because I never want to miss anything that might be high risk, again, then I want to increase my recall. So you can kind of tweak around how confident you want to be in something being a a high-risk product. Then I've got things like my accuracy reports. This is more kind of for the data. We try and explain everything in user-friendly language so you can kind of learn along the way. But these are some more kind of statistical charts for you to determine how well the model is performing. And then the training details actually shows you all of the runs that AutoML did, and you can kind of see how it learned along the way. And you've got the transparency on what was the final model that was fitted. In this case, we have a pre-fitted soft voting classifier that was fitted. And you can kind of see the parameters that were used. So once I have a model that I'm happy with, I can apply this model to new, fresh data, and I can start building up my reports with it. So you can see over here, this is a report that we've gone ahead and built out. This has my backorder risk score that's coming from the model and the label. But it also has some other fields that I might be interested in plotting, such as the location, distribution center of the product. And now when I actually click into one of these over here, you can see that I have a high backorder risk for this particular product. And the waterfall chart over here gives me my row level explanation. So this is something else that comes from AutoML that's just provided out of the box, which is for each row, AutoML tells us why it gave it that score. So we can see that in this case, we have a high risk score because we have bad forecast accuracy, our inventory levels are low, we're behind in manufacturing, and all of these factors together are pushing up this risk score and resulting in this risk score of 86. So we want to make sure that we provide that sort of transparency when it comes to giving you the predictions for the models that you built. So these are the automated ML capabilities. So I see there's a question about non-premium workspaces, and yeah, I agree with basically, Benny's response that premium per user. This, for those who might not be familiar, this is a new capability that's now in preview, and it's going to be basically a new way of being able to consume premium capabilities, which is on a per user basis. And all of the AI capabilities that are currently in premium, such as automated ML and cognitive services, are available as part of the premium per user SKU, which makes these capabilities more accessible. So we're not that's kind of our answer to to that. We're not going to make it not part of premium, but it is going to be more accessible through that premium per user SKU. And then I see there's, I'm just going to read through because Christopher's message is a little bit longer. So how's the forecasting done in Power BI? Yeah, so then this, and so Christopher, correct me if I'm wrong, you're referring to the forecasting capabilities that, let me see if I can, okay, there we go, that basically exist where I can go into the, and I'm gonna, yeah, I can't replicate this right now because I don't have a time series, but you mean the forecasting capabilities that appear in the analytics pane?
Yeah, that's the one that he means. Yeah, correct.
Yeah. Yes. So yeah, that's that. To my understanding, that is we haven't done any new changes to the forecasting capabilities. So my understanding is that's still the case. But I honestly, to be completely transparent, I haven't. The forecasting capabilities were built before my time as the PM for this area. So I think if that's what we have in the documentation, that I would assume that's the case, but I'm not sure. There's definitely not been any changes done to the way that it's worked in the last couple of years.
Okay, there's one more question that's a bit higher up. Fernando is asking, do you know if there's anything like a public sample database, etc., that is an excellent example to play around with these AI functionalities, because he's dying to try them out on a data set that fits those features perfectly.
Yeah, that's a great question. We don't have a public sample database. I typically send around Excel files to users who want to try things out along with the PBIX reports. So, I'm happy to, how to share those out, but yeah, I would love to improve the samples a little bit. It's just something that haven't had the chance to do at the moment, but I see that Christopher's suggesting AdventureWorks. AdventureWorks might be a good one. I haven't. The problem with some of the AI capabilities is you do need like something that could be good predictive capabilities, and so sometimes the data needs to be quite like the scenario, not like the generic samples will not necessarily work as well, but that might be a good one to try. But yeah, I would love to be able to set, to create more of those at some point if hopefully one day I have the bandwidth to do it. Okay, yeah, Kaggle is a great suggestion. That is, for those who are not familiar, it's a website where basically businesses who have machine learning problems sort of create competitions for data scientists, and they basically give you the data and say, hey, we want to get the best, let's say, fraud monitoring model, and people will go and try and build models based on that. So for data science problems, Kaggle is a really, really good website to try. And there is, I know, a pretty good data set that I use pretty often from there for like basically demos is this one, which is looking at, it's a real data set from a Portuguese bank that's been open sourced for marketing campaigns, and they try and predict whether someone is going to open up an account following a phone campaign that they're running. And so this is a really good, and you beat me to it. I was going to, add the link, but that's something that I think is, if you want to, let's say, get started with your first machine learning model, or you want to try out key influencers, it's not a very big data set, but it's got, I think, 50,000 rows in it, but it's not very sparse. But it's definitely a really good one to get started with, so I would recommend this one. But great question. Cool, so I think we have a few minutes left. Just want to see if there are any last questions, comments, feedback, anything that might be top of mind. All right, so that's the content that I wanted to walk through today. Happy to, if there's any other questions that anyone has, happy to follow on email as well, or if you do have any feedback on whether it's the anomaly detection or feature suggestions, like things like the DAX functions, like please always feel free to contact me. Talking to customers is my #1 hobby in my job. If I could just talk to customers all day, I would do it. So always happy to talk about these capabilities. Always open to having you reach out to me.